Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here. I'm the founder of aBlogtoWatch, and I'm joined by our news editor, Sean-Paul Lorenzen. We spend a lot of time on eBay as watch collectors. eBay helped me get into watches to begin with, and eBay asked us to do a curated list of watches to help you sort through the many timepieces they have available. And so that's what we've done for you. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the watches that we've selected. These are watches we're excited about. Harder to find watches, a little bit less known, but again, we are people that really know this stuff, and we're helping you with a little bit of a head start on using eBay to find your next watch. So Sean, what's the first watch that you chose?
Absolutely, we've got some exciting choices lined up today. The first choice on my list is this Omega Speedmaster Mark II. This is from around 1970. It has this beautiful tropical brown dial, a little bit of uneven aging. On top of that, it's also completely unpolished, case is in great shape, and it's fitted with the very desirable Holzer bracelet, which was available through Omega of Mexico in the early 1970s. It's a very rare option.
So this is a rather rare and collectible watch, and you've talked about some of the condition that you look for. What is it about this particular Speedmaster you like? There's so many of them. You search for Speedmaster on eBay, you and I know you're going to get thousands and thousands of choices. What is it about something like this that gets collectors all crazy?
So the Mark II has historically been an undervalued watch. If you look at a traditional Speedy Professional from these years in the late 1960s, early 1970s, they're going for a lot of money nowadays, but the Mark II, even though it's functionally the same watch in a different case, has been a little bit colder to collectors. And over the past year or so, people have really started to wake up to what great watches these are. It's this fantastic tonneau case style, an internal tachometer bezel so it prevents it from impact. Very sleek, very 70s, very sporty, very easy.
Show me a few more of these pictures here.
Certainly,
because we've seen so many different Speedmasters. I like to see how they look different from time to time. Now that is a little bit of a distinctive bracelet, and you said that at the time, sometimes local regions and distributors would, put their own bracelet on something that was a little bit different. Stuff like that doesn't really happen anymore, does it?
No, it really doesn't. Nowadays, especially in the watch market, we look at sort of a global market rather than a domestic or like a USDM, European market piece. But this especially is a really desirable combo because you have this tropical dial, which usually happens in tropical warm climates, on a bracelet that was available from Omega of Mexico. So this is probably a watch that originally came out of Mexico, possibly Mexico City, which had a huge Omega boutique at the time. And so it's got some really interesting history and provenance there.
Last question on this. You talked about this tropical dial. It's a browning effect. What exactly is it that makes some of these old black watch dials brown today?
That's a really interesting process, and it's something that doesn't happen with modern dial paints. There was something with the enamels that were used between about the 1930s and the 1970s that over time, with exposure to heat and humidity, would age into a brown surface.
Interesting. Now let's talk about one of the watches that I chose. Now this is a Longines Big Eye Chronograph, and this enters sort of the price range where you start to have eBay's authenticity guarantee. As we know, watches that are priced at $2,000 or above in the US and other markets, and hopefully more places soon, are going to be individually checked by people to make sure that they are what they say they are. Now that's such a big deal, especially when you're buying something remote. So you and I as collectors have understood how to use eBay, and knowing that they have this new service that is, really going to make a lot more people feel comfortable with the platform, because they don't all know what they're doing as much as we do. So here's something that's just over $2,000. Now, we remember when this came out. This isn't that old of a watch.
Yeah, this is 5 or 6 years ago.
5 or 6 years ago now. And Longines, doesn't make this watch anymore. And it was a remake of an old pilot's watch that had a slightly larger seconds counter or minutes counter there for the chronograph, and that's why they called it the Big Eye, because there's an asymmetric quality there, which you'd think would actually turn off some people, but in the story here, this actually made this watch a lot more popular. And so here you have this watch that did really well for Longines, and you can still get them on eBay, and that's one of the reasons I really like eBay. is you can go ahead and find those timepieces that are just no longer available in a retail environment and get
certainly,
them.
yeah.
So the Longines Big Eye is something that a lot of people may have missed back at the time. 41 millimeters chronograph. Very difficult to find a nice sporty watch that is sort of mid-sized like that. eBay is really going to be one of the primary places to get some of this this modern but no longer made watches.
Absolutely. And that's a very important point. The authentication tool that Ariel was talking about is such a powerful tool for buyers to be able to buy with confidence. It really does change the game, where a lot of people have been hesitant to buy through eBay before. They've worried, well, am I going to get scammed? Is this going to be a fake? And now if you're going out and buying a luxury watch from eBay, you know you're getting what you're bidding on. And the aVlogtoWatch Big Eye specifically, there's so much personality there, and at that price is still a fantastic value.
Yeah, it's really, really great. What's something else that you chose?
Oh, certainly. So the next one on my list is similar. It's a few years old now, about 5 years old. It's a Heuer Manzo, what they call the limited edition Ferrari, a re-edition of a watch they made back in 1976 to celebrate Niki Lauda's first Formula One championship in 1975. So it has this black DLC titanium case on top of a very aggressive red and black dial colorway with some very nice aged Fontainebleau.
I remember when this originally came out, and the Manzo was one of those Tag Heuers you just didn't really hear about.
Yeah.
But it definitely had a case that was not, traditionally around. It's got this cushion style case. So I think so many people were curious about this, but they didn't know some of the backstory that you're talking about. And only now, years later, we're finding the collector community is getting so much more involved, because you just had to be in the sort of right knowledge space when this came out to get it.
The thing to remember is these were limited editions at the time. They were a numbered edition. Tag Heuer only made them for a very short time. And so there are a lot of collectors that love this look that just weren't able to buy one at the time. And prices, because this is about a 5-year-old watch, are starting to swing up. You've had the depreciation hit now from it being, initially sold. And now is the time as a collector to buy and to hold on to that. It's a very good time to buy these.
Okay, so another thing that I chose here, and remember, this is a larger list of over 50 watches that we chose that has all kinds of things, but things that are interesting to us as the editorial staff of aBlogtoWatch. And again, there's hundreds of thousands of luxury watches available on eBay at any given time, I believe. And so being able to consolidate it down to a curated selection, I think, was a really, really big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Because without that, I can imagine a layperson has some search paralysis, not knowing what direction to go. So here's something that you'd probably never look for. This is definitely a no longer made watch, but still relatively modern. This is by a watchmaker named Braun, and this was when he had his own brand. And what's amazing about this watch, it's one of the very few mechanical sunrise sunset watches. And it is not that there have never been sunrise sunset time watches, but most of them have been part of other grand complications that nobody would ever wear.
Oh, yeah.
Or just sort of not really the emphasis. But this was really the emphasis. And Braun is a very talented watchmaker, a very creative person. And so what he wanted to do is make a watch that featured this complication. And what's always been interesting from a visual perspective is the way that you have these sort of, I call them combating hands. And these are special type of hands that are meant to move visually very small distances with high precision. And you've seen this type of look on some old watch dials where they're able to do this. So he took something that you've seen in the past or has existed in the past, and he sort of brought it front and center to a modern type of watch. If you wear one of these things, I mean, guaranteed you're not going to see anyone else out there that has something like that. And one of the funny things about this watch is it had to be set to a specific city.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It could take into consideration the time of year, but the changes in longitude and latitude and things like that, they of course change the sunrise sunset time, especially the changes in, the how close you are to the equator. So such a cool watch from a no longer existing brand. Mr. Braun himself, of course, is still in the industry, and you can get this for it's a luxury watch, but for a price that isn't crazy. And I think in the future these are going to be pretty highly sought after. They're definitely unique.
Oh yeah, for that kind of complication, that sort of mechanically complex, what you would usually associate with very, very high-end haute horology, to see that at that price is pretty spectacular.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. Okay, what's next on your list?
My next pick is something that in years gone by was a collector's favorite, but in recent years has been something sort of left by the wayside, and that's the Rolex Oyster Bubbleback. Bubblebacks were a staple of Rolex's lineup for decades in the 1930s and 40s, and they're these beautiful, sort of undersized by today's standards, 33, 34 millimeter watches with a vast variety of dials in a sort of traditional Oyster case.
And these are older watches.
Yes, this particular example is from 1941.
That's about as far back as many people could even conceive of going in a vintage watch, given
Certainly.
condition and practicality. Is this a watch that you could practically wear today?
Yes. These early Rolex movements were built very heavily. They're very robust. They're over-engineered. And in terms of a lot of watches from this era, which can be notoriously delicate, these are still very tough and wearable day to day. And this particular example is a very strong presentation. There's a lot to like here. It's what's known as a California dial. So in the top half of the dial, you have Roman numerals. And in the bottom half, you have Arabic numerals. So your traditional 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is called a California dial because Rolex dealers in California in the 1940s started requesting this as a special option from the brand. And so it's a bit of a rare option. A lot of brands have copied this look in modern watches, but to find an original California dial with this kind of patina, this sort of pale gold look, is fantastic, especially with the small seconds complication.
And these days, of course, this is a little bit smaller in diameter than what a lot of men are used to wearing. What is the size? And explain at the time, who would have worn this? This would have been a men's watch at the time.
Oh, this would have been the sports watch at the time. This would have been, we're used to thinking of sports watches nowadays at about 42 millimeters. This at 34 millimeters in the 1940s was the big, bold, sporty watch of the time. Most watches were around 30 to 31 and very delicately built. So this is a much more aggressive case. This was the most waterproof case Rolex made at the time, the original Oyster case.
It's an automatic even, which was
rare at the time.
Rare at the time. So it's very much a close to a modern watch wearing experience.
Yes.
But again, I think that if you had just gone through old Rolex watches or old, vintage watches in general, it'd be really hard to find one of something like this.
But they are, as vintage watches go, especially wartime and pre-war vintage watches go, extremely wearable and set the template for a lot of what became the modern sports watch.
And I love that you're into some of these watches that go back a lot further than some of my own personal interests.
Yeah.
And that's sort of something that defines the different tastes on the aBlogtoWatch team, or just for different collectors, is we like different eras, different styles, different sizes, and things like that.
Yeah.
For me, this is pretty vintage. Looking at this next watch here, this is a watch produced by IWC for Porsche Design. Porsche Design today makes their own watches, but they have this long history of working with other companies, Orfina, Eterna, and IWC, that made watches. And this one was, they called it the Superlite, and from the era it was. I love this case shape. There's sort of this 80s futurism that I grew up with. A lot of people grew up that came from the movies and the pop culture and things like that. And this just sort of fits the bill so much. You have this wide bracelet with these horizontal links. This entire watch is in titanium, I believe, with the black coating. And you can see some of the condition here. These pictures are not amazing, but the condition of the black there's little parts of it that have sort of come off a little bit. I love the round case that has the integrated chronograph pushers on there.
Yeah, very sleek.
Such a slick design there. Again, you rarely see that today, but here you can see a little bit how the pusher is integrated into the roundness of the case. Porsche Design was, it came from the world of Porsche automobiles, same family and things like that. And so they really had this idea of the form following function. It was
Yes.
really about what it did first, had to look nice, but it's all about functionality first. And today, some of these dials would be considered a little bit basic, but you could say the exact same thing about an Omega Speedmaster.
Yeah,
and that's considered a classic.
They're very usable. They're so easy to read. They're function first. And it's funny you bring up 80s sci-fi with these, because when I see this, the first thing is, if Darth Vader wore a watch, it would be this.
Yeah, and this specific one happens to be from Japan, and I think it's really important to note that watches in Japan tend to be in a very good quality.
Absolutely.
Collectors there treat the watches very well. So of course, there's no universal rules to say that others don't treat their watches well. But seeing something like this from Japan, knowing that there's a lot of collectors there that value watches of this era, even though the pictures are not the clearest in the world, there's of course that feeling of assurance. Plus, this is under the authenticity guarantee,
Yeah.
so you feel very, very safe, because Japan is one of the countries which is included in that, along with the United States. So I thought this was really, really great. The price made a lot of sense, and what I like about some of the watches, especially from collectors in Japan, they will ask for top dollar for something in perfect condition.
Yes.
But once there's any type of cosmetic issues that I tend to be okay with,
Yeah.
the prices become very, very agreeable, very, very fast. Sort of an
Yes.
insider tip that you and I kind of know.
If you're looking for a watch with light patina, if you want something that looks a little bit vintage, look for a Japanese seller. Most of the Japanese sellers on eBay, especially the high volume sellers, are very reputable.
And very honest and clear, and you'll get amazingly descriptive listings. So here's an interesting one from Japan, a cool old IWC made for Porsche design, and this fantastic design. Porsche design came out with a remake of this a little while ago, but if you could get the original in good condition, why not, right?
Yeah, it's only original once. Anything else is just trying to capture that same magic.
And speaking of interesting futuristic designs, you've got this interesting Hamilton that I want to hear you talking about.
Totally. So the next thing on my list is one of my personal favorites. Everyone in the vintage chronograph collecting world loves the Caliber 11. This is the very first automatic chronograph ever made, arguably, in 1969, used by a whole handful of brands, most famously by Heuer. However, one of the other brands in the conglomerate that helped design the Caliber 11 was Hamilton. And Hamilton at the time was doing a lot of very interesting things with their design team. Their lead designer had just worked with Stanley Kubrick at the time on 2001: A Space Odyssey, and developed a set of limited edition watches based on that film, and then came directly into this project.
And some were in the film.
Yes, they were. And a lot of the same design ideas that went into 2001 made their way into the Fontainebleau. So this is Hamilton's very first automatic chronograph, one of the very first automatic chronographs ever made, in this very futuristic flying saucer oval case. On top of that, in incredible condition, the original strap from 1969 with box and hanging tag. These are incredibly difficult to find in good condition. Heuer collectors, when they see a Caliber 11 in this kind of condition, it's a strong 5-figure watch. You're looking at well above $10,000, even for less desirable models.
Wow.
But this particular Hamilton Fontainebleau is for sale right now on eBay for $44.95, under $4,500. Believe me, these
And that's
will
considered
go
a good
up.
price?
Absolutely.
It's fantastically distinctive looking. By today's standards, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily know that it was futuristic.
Yeah.
Because there was sort of a sleekness of shape that was very popular in that era. It came from, of course, this is an architectural term, so it came from architecture at the time, the whole sort of spaceships that they were imagining.
Oh,
this
absolutely.
is just after the moon landing era. So there was so much, I'll call it astro-optimism going on in design. And you see that here, and you can imagine, some of these utopian cities they built out in like Brazil, and this being sort of the watch that would fit naturally into that landscape.
Yes.
Very, very cool choice. And then going with futuristic, a little bit more high end. is an Orwer UR202. This one is in 18 karat white gold. I remember when these watches came out several years ago. Orwer, of course, no longer makes the 202. And this watch is one of the most popular sort of high-end independents on the market right now. These are brands that are decidedly avant-garde, definitely Swiss. Orwer is based in Geneva, very, very high-end, but trying to sort of be the anti-classic.
Yeah.
And they do a very good job at it. And what's amazing is how well the design of some of these have held up. And it is not entirely common to see Orwer watches or watches of this ilk on eBay. Of course, they are from time to time, mainly because they're not sold that often. People tend to buy these and like them. I mean, there's a lot of very famous celebrities that collect Orwer. And what was really important about Orwer is not showing the time in the standard way. No Orwer watch I know of tells time in the standard way. Well, there's a few with a little 12-hour dial in the EMCs, but for the most part, they have other crazy things going on. This has the satellite system, wandering hours, if you call it, and you have these almost like cubes that indicate the time, which drag along a minute indicator. And they turn, and then you have here a moon phase, and I think that's a power reserve or a day-night indicator. There's always like other little complications they would throw in there. Here we have just one picture, which is a shame here because there's so much going on here. But again, this is under that authenticity guarantee. So if there was ever something you didn't see, eBay's got you covered. And again, this is not the same as it was years ago. I remember 20 years starting out on eBay, and it was a lot of like, what is this, what's being sold? Because eBay is a platform. eBay doesn't have any inventory control or anything, but now it's really the safest platform, which I think is fantastic.
Absolutely.
So close to $80,000, but if you are a collector of watches at this particular price point, I think that you would agree any watch collector would give a thumbs up to something like an Orwer.
100%. When you see an Orwer on somebody's wrist, there's no mistaking it for anything else.
Absolutely.
And this is Orwer's signature dish, the satellite hours. To me, when I see these, this is always Tony Stark's watch. Robert Downey Jr. very famously wore several different Orwer models throughout the Marvel films. He's publicly worn a lot of them in his own personal life. And that epitomizes that high-tech, futuristic superhero look that I just love so much.
Well, since you mentioned Robert Downey Jr., we can also say that people like Ralph Lauren and Michael Jordan are known to be Orwer fans and collectors. So I think that this is one of those rare luxury names that's going to go a little bit more mainstream in the coming years. Out of the watches that we selected to talk about for this curated eBay list that aBlogtoWatch has come up with, what's the last one you want to talk about today?
So we're now going from something very futuristic, very avant-garde, to a real classical beauty from Arnold and Sun. This is the Arnold and Sun moon phase. Usually when you see moon phase complications in watches, they're a small subdial somewhere on the watch. But Arnold and Sun dedicates almost half of its dial to this big, beautiful, handcrafted golden moon disc. It's absolutely breathtaking, especially in person, and especially this particular iteration against a blue guilloche enamel dial. It's just stunning, stunning dial finishing work, and on top of that, incredible movement work.
That's a gold case.
Yeah. It's rose gold.
And I love here on the movement that was designed for this, there's a more precision setting for the moon phase. And so they really had ergonomics built into this. Did you know that this is actually the watch I wore on my wedding day?
You did?
Yeah,
I did not
wore
know
an
that.
Arnold and Sun moon phase.
I don't blame you. They are truly, truly beautiful.
And you know who did this sort of large moon dial before Arnold and Sun was Martin Braun.
Oh, tying it back in.
Yeah,
that is amazing.
And his was really about having an ultra accurate one, which they picked up. So the idea of being able to set it precisely was formed from the, I think they called it the true moon or something like that.
Oh.
So it's interesting how you and I independently found interest in this particular type of
mechanism.
thing. So, okay, so we're going to choose the last one here. And I love talking about these watches. All of the 50 watches or 50 or so watches that we chose for this curated selection on eBay have stories behind them. We have a passionate reason for choosing them. We wish we could sit down with you and tell you the stories about all of them, but we're giving you a little bit of sample here. So the last one that I chose is We'll just say it's a $100,000 Mickey Mouse watch.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
And you know, you can get a watch with Mickey Mouse on it for a lot less money, but why not spend $100,000? Retail, it was more. This is a Gerald Genta Octo Mickey Mouse tourbillon.
Wow.
This was created at the time where the Gerald Genta brand had a relationship with Disney, and the fanciest out of all the watches was the tourbillon. And here we have all this amazing traditional dial work. We have enamel, we have all these things, and we have one of the classic Mickeys. This isn't the modern one because, of course, it's a classic watch. You have to have the classic Mickey. What's interesting is it doesn't even have Mickey's moving hands.
No.
Which is sort of a staple of, you know, Mickey Mouse watches. And actually, Gerald Genta did do some stuff with the moving hands, but this one's a little bit more traditional. We'll call it an Art Deco dial if, you know, at the time they thought that Mickey Mouse should have been presented in architecture.
Yes.
It was too pop culture-y back then. So this is sort of like a rewriting history kind of timepiece. And tourbillons today are definitely a little bit more available. But you know what? At the time when this came out, and this was, I think, the either early 2000s or the late 90s, this really would have been extremely, extremely exotic. This was when, you know, Gerald Genta himself was still alive, and you know, the brand today is actually owned by Bulgari, and it's controlled, you know, through them, and they're owned by LVMH. But this is when it was still very, very independent, and it's fantastic. It's desirable today because of the Gerald Genta name, association with popular watches such as the Nautilus and the Royal Oak. And you have here the tourbillon, which is this enduring symbol of luxury. So this is a very exotic type of watch, highly esoteric.
Extremely.
But you throw the Mickey Mouse on there and all of a sudden it sort of plunges itself into the larger pop culture that demands and loves products like this so much. So it's an interesting merger of the world of obscure horology with pop culture Disney.
This is a familiar case to a lot of watch enthusiasts, but not in this form. This is the Octo, which many, many enthusiasts know nowadays as a Bulgari case, but was originally launched as a Gerald Genta brand.
Yes.
And so this is one of the early iterations of the Octo, and still one of the most wild and out there versions of the Octo.
Yeah. Sean, thank you so much for talking to me about these watches that we chose on eBay. To recap, you can see the curated list of watches that the aBlogtoWatch team has chosen on eBay. There'll be links around this video. And of course, you can check out more about watches on aBlogtoWatch.com. Thank you so much.